praises to the Most High. So, I'm gonna read over a little bit of this article that I was gonna start, but I don't know if we started it yet. Yeah, I don't know if we started this. I don't know if I got charged. Hopefully, I got charged in this laptop. Let me see. All right, let's finish reading where we left off, and then we try to get into the one on Judges. So, consider another example of the the family being stripped of its authority, zoning of family property versus family regulation of property. Consider local zoning ordinances or zoning boards of appeal as an example of how the family has been made dependent upon the state for permission to take dominion over its own land. God gave families the right and power to take dominion over their own little piece of land. How does this right stand today? Certainly, the state may encourage families to take dominion over their property and to subdue their own land through building homes, garages, sheds, and by digging wells, planting gardens and fields, and by raising animals and harvesting crops. But the state has no authority to authorize, regulate, or license a family in the exercise of these obligations. God gave these obligations to the family exclusively and not to the state or local zoning board. Local government or zoning officials instead say to the family, you may not undertake any of these tasks except by our leave. In answering the government denial, we may assert that God says to the family, take dominion over the animals in your land, subject to no man's permission. God took Adam and put him in a garden in Eden to work it and keep it. Why can't he do the same for you? You want to have a garden in your city? Noah was a man of the soil and he planted a vineyard. Why can't he do the same for you? These people had authority over their land. That authority arose under the grant of God directly from his mouth as a binding rule for all generations. This is not to say that a family may use its property to the hurt or injury of its neighbor. A family which uses its property to the actual and demonstrable hurt or injury of its neighbor may certainly be enjoyed by a court and prohibited from further doing so, provided his neighbor can establish an actual harm or injury. This is the law of public and private nuisance, but zoning restrictions are not based on actual harm to your property caused by your neighbor's use of his property. They are not based on any harm at all. They are based on what a master planner believes your local city should look like to ensure maximum revenue to the local government and property taxes. Don't be naive about this. Don't believe that argument that your property values will be higher with zoning. People will pay for freedom just as they will for the illusion of security. But there is no security in being controlled right down to the approved color of exterior paint you can use. This is the challenge of the 21st century. The family must dare to recover its God-given authority over its own land. Yet today, none dare call this authority the authority of the family. When the family actually attempts to assert its authority over its own land, that family is labeled a public nuisance, a threat to the community, or fanatics. Though the state may provide a remedy for legal wrongs, it may not demand that a family first seek its permission to do what is right and good. And it is right and good to fulfill those obligations which God has entrusted to the family concerning land use, which does no harm to one's neighbor. Regretfully, most Christians serving in local government never heard this idea or simply think just the opposite. They think that everyone must comply with their decisions about what land is zoned for specific purposes, what is an acceptable use, and what is a permitted use. They probably know nothing about Genesis or the authority of the family based on God's command. They probably never heard anything of the sort in their churches or from the pulpit, nor are they likely to hear it preached. They will have to learn it on their own if such matters as the will of God for families is of any interest to them. Now let's talk about voluntary surrender of familial authority to one's employer. While the usurpation of family authority by the school and state with respect to the family's use of its own land and education of its own children has been forced upon families by the law, quite another situation presents itself with respect to the loss of family authority to the employer. The obligations which God has extended to the family and required of the family have not been taken away by the employer by the force of law. Consider the world of business and commerce. Whether you are employed by another or self-employed, your labor ought to be an extension of the gifts, talents, and abilities which God has given into your hand. To the extent the employer encourages and utilizes those gifts, talents, and abilities, then to that extent, your employment itself is an extension of and a servant of your familial obligation to labor through the work of your hand or the thoughts of your mind. We are not talking about ministry. We are talking about any work reflecting your skills and abilities. This is as it should be. But to the extent the employer does not encourage or utilize your gifts, talents, and abilities, to the extent your labor is just a paycheck, then to that extent your employment is not an extension of or the servant of your familial obligation to take dominion through your work, but rather the employer is simply a means to an end, income. For many families, it comes down to this, just to survive. But if the opportunity to change comes along, it should be considered. Many employers have goals and objectives which are good. Assuming that the employer's goals and objectives are good and right, the question is whether or not the employer's objectives are a practical extension of your own, and whether or not the employer's means of achieving those objectives rely upon and utilize your God-given gifts, talents, and abilities. Many of us do not labor in a way which attempts to utilize our God-given gifts, talents, and abilities. Perhaps the financial benefits of that arrangement simply outweigh the familial stress of an uncertain financial future. Every family must judge the efficiency of its trade-offs. The goal of the family in the 21st century in this new millennium with respect to employment, however, should be to increase familial freedom to apply our God-given gifts, talents, and abilities more often and to better effect than at present. This is the challenge of the 21st century. The family must recover the freedom to labor in an employment environment which relies upon, utilizes, and extends your God-given gifts, talents, and abilities. Yet, who dares call this goal a family goal? Let's talk about clergy and physician complicity with lockdowns attacking family. There are bright spots with home-based businesses, but we cannot all work at home, even after the COVID manipulated government lockdowns. These lockdowns were a direct and merciless assault on the family's authority. By imposing lockdowns, state governors, health officials, and political charlatans did not see fit to acknowledge God or his grant of authority to the family to make its own health-related decisions and responses to the virus. In-person work itself was prohibited and made punishable. Those who imposed, funded, and enforced such mandates did evil. Those who actively supported this evil were either misinformed, uninformed, or cowards. Those who compared the lockdowns, masking, and experimental vaccinations to the will of God deserve sharp rebuke. Those who were made to follow these laws were victims. In response to this evil attack on family governance and labor, God gave our governors, health officials, and others over their own debased mindset. God gave our governors, health officials, and others over to their own debased mindset. They thought they were in charge of our health and labor. These officials were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, imposing restrictions which were not desired by the people. They instituted sacred rituals, muzzles, and social distancing. They funded and concocted injectable potions called vaccines. They cast their media spells upon the people with fear and threats. Their lockdown orders were built on their evil mindset and fueled by fiction and magic. What's going on, Stephen Livingston? The whole charade had the result of coveting the family's decision-making authority over their health and labor. Enforcement of the orders was heartless and ruthless. Though government officials should know God's righteous decrees regarding the family's autonomy and self-governance to work and labor, and its liberty to assume the risk of infection, including the freedom to choose or refuse vaccination, they disregarded that liberty and encouraged others to follow their tyrannical ways, declaring their own evil good and family autonomy to make its own decisions evil. They said your family can't make their own decisions because that's evil. That's what they said. We got to make the decisions. Most churches, clergy, and many Christians foolishly went along with the state government's lawlessness. The same is true for the healthcare industry and your family physician. They did not care to apply the authority of a family from God's perspective to the lockdowns. Most people, however, were simply ignorant of God's views. Sermons either touted obedience to the government or followed the government's masking and social distancing playbook. Did you hear about the authority of the family to decide how it will use its home, determine the safety of attending work, or evaluate the wisdom of mask or distancing? You did not. Why? Because your pro-family church is not pro-family. As a matter of fact, your church probably substituted your pastor's judgment for your God-given authority to decide for yourself what risk you shall undertake. The church did this if it declared you must wear a mask to enter the church building to worship Almighty God. Who made your minister or elder the Lord of your conscience? Who made them competent to give medical advice? Who entrusted them with the authority to govern how you will worship? With whom, at what distance, and with what covering on your face? The family God desires is one that will confront the impious presumption of both legislators and rulers, civil as well as ecclesiastical. These rulers were created by people who themselves are fallible and uninspired, yet they have assumed dominion over the faith of others, setting up their own opinions and modes of thinking as the one and only true and infallible view. As such, they have established and maintained false religion. Many more simply believe the lie that our freedoms will be restored at the end of a vaccine needle. Does anyone know how to interpret the signs of the times anymore? Let us not be gullible about the church's failures in this regard or your health provider. In large part, they went along with the government's COVID response plans. They shut their doors. They practiced the state's COVID rituals. They preached the desirability of the injectable potion. They repeated the governor's spells. The result was that houses and savings were devoured. Businesses started by families. Look at, oh man, I missed them. The birds was over here bathing in this puddle. I think I scared them when I tried to get the camera to turn it around and record them. But let's continue. They preached the desirability of the injectable potion. They repeated the governor's spells. The result was that houses and savings were devoured. Businesses started by families and their church struggled. The clergy were quiet when the government forcibly concentrated the sick and old together and denied family visits, which accelerated our elderly parents' lonely death. These governmental charlatans will receive the greater condemnation. What would a clergy watchman receive? Luke chapter 20, verse 45 to 47. Regardless of whether you work, try to see how your labor is an extension of the mandate that every family should be master of its own labor. Stop listening to the government, its officials, and paid public service announcements as to how to live your life, work, and maintain your health. The church binding family to its obligations. Finally, consider the local church, your church. Here we find no civil law compelling anyone to attend. We find no civil law compelling anyone to believe or compelling anyone to turn over our money or tithe. All these things we do voluntarily. Every family now has within its own hand the power to organize, arrange, and discharge every duty and obligation which they owe to God without interference from the local church. But what have we made of this freedom? Have we been beguiled to give up freedom to the church by the church itself? By God's grace, the family is free to baptize its own children, if that is its desire, and to confess sin directly to God, to take communion, give and receive instruction, and to worship God Almighty at such time and in such manner as the family deems appropriate. The family is free to do all these things without the permission or consent of any other body of believers, any cleric or any church, local or otherwise. The family is free to do these things because God has made it free and has never given to the church any power to demand the family first seek its permission prior to enjoying any of the liberties or privileges associated with the priesthood of all believers. But modern church leaders teach either explicitly or implicitly that the family is simply incompetent to discharge its duty to worship God and to enjoy all of these freedoms. We are told that the family is not competent to baptize because it lacks ordination. The family is not competent to administer communion because it is not composed of approved priests or ministers. Neither is the family competent to give or receive instruction because it has not received appropriate theological training like Philip Anthony Mitchell. And you see what happened, what's going on with him, how he getting called out for all his idolatry. And he went to seminary school. Added to these falsehoods is the argument that the family may not and indeed ought not perform any of these functions on its own, and moreover, that it must exercise these liberties only according to the time, place, and manner which the church or some pastoral leader has authorized. Both Protestant and Catholic institutions differ only in matters of degree on these points. Neither dare call such liberties the liberty of a family. None dare call the exercise of these liberties the exercise of a family's liberty. In short, the church says you must go through the church in order to get to God with respect to some dimension of worship. This claim should sound familiar. The school says you must go through the school in order to get to the education of your children. The state says you must go through the bureaucracy in order to take authority over your own land and labor. Today, the church has said you must go through the church in order to have fellowship or to worship God. The soft sell of this false teaching is that you should be a member of a local body, and that's nonsense. This is not to say that there's no place for the church. nor that the church may not baptize or offer communion or such and like things. It is only to say that the family, which was created 4,000 years before the church, may do these things without the permission of the church or the necessity of doing them through a local church. The church is here, among other reasons, to encourage the family in the discharge of its obligations to God and to elucidate those obligations. Regretfully, it knows nothing of the Genesis family authority or of God's pleasure with fathers and mothers teaching their children the ways of God and of justice and righteousness. The church has gotten hung up on elevating evangelism and personal discipleship to the head of all truths. This is all it knows and feels it may safely teach without offending the flock. If it departs from these and begins to teach the whole counsel of God, perhaps your church fears it will lose members and revenue. You can bet it will indeed lose these things if it begins to teach about God's purpose for and authority of the family. Don't expect your church to change its spots to actually help build up the family to educate its own children free from state interference, regulation, and control. Don't expect the church to help build up families to use their land in the manner which God directs, rather than in obedience to local zoning ordinances. Don't expect the church to build up the family by affirming that worship and discipleship are the duties of parents and the church is a voluntary resource rather than our master. Don't expect your pastor to have any understanding about the implications of God's grant of authority to you as a father or you as a mother or to you as a parent. To them, these things are of secondary importance to their ministry of evangelism and preaching Christ in every sermon. Don't expect your elders or pastor to champion these core and fundamental biblical truths. They don't have the theological training to accord the family its God-given place because their training has erroneously taught them that the Great Commission is the only thing that really matters. They probably don't even believe the family enjoys the freedom stated herein anyway. If you try to change the mind of your religious leaders, they must first have the ears to hear these truths. It is all right to let the blind lead the blind. It is the responsibility of families we are discussing anyway. You don't need their support or permission. The husband and wife and father and mother must lead by example. The church's consent or the clergy's understanding is not required. At worst, they will oppose you. At best, they can be ignored. While fellowship with other believers is a way to help better fulfill a family's obligations, it is not dependent upon local fellowship. The church was not put on this earth by God Almighty to usurp any function or obligation of the family. And if and when it does so against God and his institution of the family itself. This is the challenge of the 21st century. The family must dare to recover its own independent duty to obey and worship God, a duty required long before there ever was a thing called the church. Moreover, the family should consider the value of encouraging its local church leader to teach the whole counsel of God, especially the stated purposes of marriage and the family. They need encouragement to be mindful of these things and to be more inclusive than just focusing on safe topics such as personal ministry and evangelism. So the conclusion is, at the end of the 20th century, the core familial obligations of education, land use, health, labor, and religion have been subjugated to the will of the state, the school, the employer, and the church. It is the challenge of each family to dare to find its way back toward the full exercise of familial authority. We need not obtain the permission of the state to educate our own children. We must change the law so that families can exercise their liberty to use their land and determine what is best for their health. We must recover the freedom to exercise the full measure of family authority which God has placed in our hand and to which God holds the family accountable. The church should play its part too, but judging by its response to the COVID-19 governmental subjugation of freedom, we must lower our expectations of its ability to lead in the restoration of the family to its God-ordained authority and purpose. So we're gonna see if we can get one more before this laptop die off. Hold on. When Judges Run Amok, The Lie of Judicial Lawmaking, Gerald R. Thompson. When Judges Run Amok, The Lie of Judicial Lawmaking. The November 1996 issue of First Things, a journal of religion and public life, was largely devoted to a synopsis of articles examining the subject of the judicial usurpation of politics. Since then, the Supreme Court decisions in Reno versus ACLU invalidating the Communications Decency Act and City of Bo Ernie versus Flores, holding the Religious Freedom Restoration Act unconstitutional, have renewed the outcry to curb judicial activism. The key issues examined in the synopsis were: 1, whether the government of the United States, via the judiciary, no longer governs by the consent of the governed, and 2, whether law, as it is presently made by the judiciary, has declared its independence from morality. However, none of the contributors found it necessary to examine or even to express any view as to the nature of judicial power. Further, none looked to the Bible for guidance in defining the proper authority of a judge. Sorry. It says, to a larger extent, public discussion of how to curb judicial activism has focused on various legal and political means of limiting what courts, or at least the U.S. Supreme Court, can do. But such proposals begin far downstream, jurisprudentially speaking, from where we should start. A more appropriate place to begin a discussion is to re-examine the nature of judicial power itself. In particular, we should reconsider a primary tenet of contemporary jurisprudence, namely that judges make law. What the voting public, Congress, other public officials, or organized religion should do is not my immediate concern. The present focus is what we Christian lawyers can and should do. I'm not a lawyer. This dude that wrote this is. Although no one can rightfully blame us for the current state of the judiciary, nonetheless, we have become a part of the overall problem. So before we can fix the external problem of judicial activism, we must first re-examine our own internal attitudes and beliefs about what judges are supposed to do. Let's get the biblical model. The Bible indicates what is the nature of judicial power. The first recorded instance of civil judgment involves Moses, who judged the people of Israel, as recorded in Exodus chapter 18, verse 16. When they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor and make known the statutes of God and his laws. Notice that Moses exercised his judgment consistent with the common law tradition. After all, Exodus 18 chronologically precedes the giving of the law in Exodus 20 and later scriptures. Since God had not yet verbally revealed his laws for Israel, how could Moses make known God's statutes? Apparently, Moses was basing his judgments in the discernment of the laws of nature, which God had impressed upon the creation. Moses also waited for the disputes to come to him. He judged between individual parties in specific cases and controversies. He did not purport to make rules binding on non-parties. Further, by making known the law of God, Moses indicated his judgment was not merely the exercise of his personal will, but rather was a declaration of law which pre-existed the dispute before him. That is, Moses did not purport to make laws for Israel, but only to declare what laws he had found. Even when Moses later acted as the law bearer to Israel, he never claimed that such laws originated with him. All Moses ever did, both as judge and as law bearer, was deliver to the people the laws God revealed to him. We could be cynical and take the position that Moses either lied about how he judged or that he didn't really know what he was doing, that in spite of his statements to the contrary, he was really making law as he judged. But how can we dispute the accuracy of Moses' statement in Exodus 18 verse 16 without calling into question the accuracy of the whole Pentateuch, which was written by him on God's behalf? And how can we disbelieve Moses found God's law as a judge, yet affirm that Moses found God's 10 commandments? What kind of Christian faith would take such positions? Moses was not alone in judging according to this pattern. Samuel, who later judged Israel, exercised a judicial function by holding King Saul accountable to the law. See 1 Samuel 13. Like Moses, Samuel did not judge according to a legal standard which was merely right in his own opinion, but judged that Saul had violated a pre-existing. We're going to get to the rest of that later. Hope y'all enjoyed that quick little lesson. Almost an hour. It feels like an hour when you're putting out this type of information, because it's stuff that you can go back and research and educate yourself on. So when you're reading this stuff, it be feeling like it's longer. I feel like I was reading for an hour. We've been live 30 minutes, y'all.
End-time prophecies coming true around us. It seems like people aren't paying enough attention. This particular sign is linked to the 4 horsemen described in the book of Revelation. These figures are starting to reveal signs of their presence and the effects they'll have on Earth. You don't need to look too far back. Just consider the events of the past 5 years worldwide. End times. Mention God, they gon' disregard. Say something pleasing to their flesh and it's gon' get applause. No palm reading, no crystal balls, no wishing stars, no picture cards. We were but we not switching squads. They gon' come against you when your mission large. They teamed up, but we still winning against the odds. Setting snares for you, they hoping you slip and fall. And all of your getting, get understanding. Don't forget the cause. Don't miss the art. Get on for your ship departs. Wise as serpents, gentle as doves. Don't be quick to talk, cause they gon' tell you what you need to hear. Just listen, great division, sheep and the goats. Just stay with the flocks. Councils took that word and it got ripped apart. Maccabees with red apocryphals, I think you skipped the part. Chapter 14, the second of Esdras. World leader slowly turning to Nebuchadnezzar's. World war, they say it's bombs over Tel Aviv.
Flashback, shackles, and chains.
They wanna let us read, cause in that Torah you might find out you a special seed, and Mount Zion is the destination
of your destiny.
And we gon' speak the truth long as we got breath to breathe. Nothing's impossible if you just believe. They say, how do you believe in what you never seen? He lives inside of me. He left his spirit when he left the scene. Woo!
Had to let it breathe.
Bible rap, get these nations all they idols back. Be set apart, dig deeper cause they hiding facts. It's time to come together with no pride attached. We are aware of the shuffling of the stage in preparation for the greatest battle of all time. That will certainly take place in the years ahead. For the ark before he opened up the floodgates. Seeking the kingdom, it's only one way. Trust the Father and do what his son say. Sheep amongst wolves, you can find us where it's unsafe. Pray I see it when he gather us in one place. Wilderness under people like the prophet said. Bread of life, living water, make sure his flock is fed. Tell the lost sheep the truth, somebody got to say it. I got tunnel vision, cut off all distractions. Won't let these demons treat me like target practice. You don't walk with fruits of the spirit, you walking backwards. We study prophets, we see it before it happens. Soon as you press play, we gon' talk repentance. Can't do business if it ain't our business. All I got is faith and works. I'm non-religious. You may not believe it, but you gotta witness. With the world against me and Abba with me, I'm straight. Endure to the end, whatever it takes. Kingdom on the way, you ain't got long to wait. It's midnight. Mention God, they gon' disregard. Yeah. Do. Big no little brother, we hunt them. Give them God's love to confront them. My people will stand for me. I maneuver handily and make a bunch of brothers everywhere to every single person family. On the edge yelling God bless from the canopy. Mirror God's image, not the mirrors in your vanity. There's a lot of winning that I plan to see. Stay low so I'm never becoming a fan of me. I remember every single evil was a fantasy. Nothing but Jehovah, the reason I got my sanity. Living on board the ocean, floating in like a manatee.